Right, now the recording started. And we would also like to encourage you to ask questions in the chat or by raising your hand, either virtually or physically, however you prefer, and to also engage in the discussions at the end of each session. We really want this to be an interactive workshop. Yes, and with this, I think we can start with our agenda. We will now start with a little debrief from the trip by Morgan Rossiter, who I already mentioned, and who's the offshore wind director at the Clean Energy Council, and Llewelyn Hughes, who's a professor at the Crawford School of Public Policy at the Australian National University, alongside a host of other roles. And he's researching or working on identifying policies for the low carbon energy transition, including offshore wind. Yes, and with this, I hand over to Morgan and Llewelyn.
Thanks, Marie. I might just quickly share some slides, but I'll hand over to Llewelyn to kick us off. Let me just see how my slide sharing goes. Always the fun time. Can you see my slide? That will be sharing. No? Okay. Good.
Morgan, do you want me to try? I have them open here.
Oh no, I think I just didn't hit the share button, so absolutely user error. There we go. What about now?
Beautiful. Hi folks. As mentioned, my name's Llewelyn. I'm a faculty member at the Crawford School at the Australian National University, which is a university based in Canberra, Australia's capital. Morgan and I have been asked to make some preliminary remarks by way of a debrief about the delegation, what we did, and some short insights from our perspectives about what we learned before we move forward to other parts of the program. Each of us are going to spend about 7 or 8 minutes doing that at the beginning. I'll pass things to Morgan to kick that off in just a second, but just to note the delegation itinerary you can see in front of yourselves here. And I guess the first thing to say is to really thank RENAC and the adelphi teams, particularly led in Australia by Franziska Teichmann and by Cecilia Starnberg in Berlin, who arranged what I think was a really informative 3 days across Berlin and also northern Germany. Really just a terrific program. And I wanted to give a special shout out to Cecilia, who I was sitting near when she learned, I think about 24 hours before we were about to depart Berlin for Hamburg, that there was a general strike on the train network, and nevertheless enabled all of us to get where we needed to go in Hamburg with no hiccups whatsoever and without using aeroplanes. It was a pretty impressive job, I thought. So you can see that day one was spent in Berlin with a variety of meetings across both industry and government. Day two in Hamburg, looking into marine spatial planning, and also doing a series of industry-related meetings, including with Siemens Energy and Siemens Gamesa. And then day three, site visits to both the port of Cuxhaven, as well as we managed on day 4 to do a flyover of some of the offshore wind farms in the North Sea. Those the kind of the activities that we engaged in, and our initial remarks will be based upon. Morgan.
Thanks, Llewelyn, and putting the itinerary up. It doesn't even look like it was as packed as it was, but yeah, it was a very jam-packed and informative time. So it was very very worthwhile trip. I'm going to summarize just sort of a few quick takeaways that have come out of the trip, and have taken a few slides from some of the proponents we met with while we were over there. So we'll go through this quite briefly, and I would just encourage, after this event, please feel free to reach out to anyone who participated in the delegation, because I'm sure we have much more to say than can sort of fit into this, even this couple of hours. So I think a really key one, and sort of one that came up the first day, but then, we kept hearing about, was the offshore wind targets in Germany and the really important role that they played. the word ambitious but realistic, the word ambitious was used a lot, and ambitious but realistic when they were speaking about the targets. So a very ambitious target of 70 gigawatts by 2050. And I think what was impressive was in 2035, for the target of 40 gigawatts, there was a requirement to build 10 gig in the final year to sort of get there. So really big, ambitious targets that are in place, but as well, like a lot of enthusiasm and support sort of nationwide to get there. Really looking at the system modelling as a whole for transitioning out coal and what the role of offshore wind is going to be. And so I think this one, you know, really struck a chord with many of us on the role of targets and how pivotal they can be, and making sure that's a really key sort of policy piece and something that we can, you know, look at how we can integrate that into Australia. Ambitious but realistic targets, I think, is a really critical one, and we could really see and hear from everyone we spoke to how important it was to have those targets to help them accelerate with the offshore wind within Germany. Second one was ports, and we will go into a further discussion, obviously, on ports after this, so I won't spend too much time on this one. But it was, you know, excellent to get out to Cuxhaven and see the port there. Something we, you know, really resonated when we were there, and we heard a lot about, was obviously the need for, you know, multi-purpose ports. Obviously, we're thinking about the offshore wind ports and the importance of it, thinking about how we can make sure the ports can facilitate offshore wind, but really, you know, key is making sure we're also considering all the other opportunities within the ports as well that will come. You know, the port in Cuxhaven was also Ro-Ro, so, you know, you can see in the photo there's a lot of vehicles there, so roll on, roll off as well, you know, making sure there's capacity for container or bulk and break bulk, and really considering, you know, the longer term life of the port beyond just offshore wind was really, really critical to ensure that, you know, strong economic development of the port. I think the other one that really came true with the ports was that sort of the regional opportunity. We spoke to some of the people from the Cuxhaven Economic Development Area who had returned from, you know, they'd grown up in the area and were able to return because of the development that was happening through the port. You know, and I see that that's something that will be really resonating, like the Hunter and Gippsland and many regional towns in Australia, where people typically will move away for certain roles. And, you know, the development with things like ports really enables people to return to their communities. So I think that was something we really saw could be quite a similarity here within Australia as well. But as I said, we'll touch on ports a bit more in the next panel. Slide. The next one was on infrastructure opportunities, and a real highlight was definitely getting to go to the Siemens Gamesa assembly plant. You know, I think you can't understand the size and scale until you're there. And I think this picture is a really great summary. I think we were all kind of quite astounded being there, you know, seeing the size of the nacelles and also just the assembly plant, how it all operates, you know, the efficiency that it operates. But I think something that really impressed me or sort of surprised me at the assembly plants was the level of human involvement. A lot less automation and robotics than you would expect for something like that. You know, huge, you know, 10, 50, 100 ton cranes moving around, but there are so many people involved in it, and it, you know, again reminded you of the opportunity that is really being created with the jobs from assembly, from construction. You know, even though this kit is so large, you know, people are still a really core component of it and will be really involved in it. So yeah, it was really great to see, and also quite impressive to walk around the plant and just see you know, containers of bolts that are one day going to go into, you know, these huge bits of kit. So yeah, that was quite impressive. I think the other one as well was, and linking back into the port infrastructure piece, was, you know, the synergy with the capabilities for assembly plants of this size and connecting in with the ports. Sort of some information I got was around it, the Siemens Gamesa, the renewable energy assembly plant, or the nacelle assembly plant. You know, it enabled you know, so many other local suppliers as well. So there's so much sort of onflow of positive impact. And I think it was, you know, 1,000 jobs when the plant's fully utilised will be created from this assembly plant. So definitely, you know, as we sort of look to strengthen that sort of the business case in Australia for offshore wind and how we're talking about it with communities, it's, you know, strengthening, you know, the opportunity that exists with jobs, and figuring out what those roles are going to be within Australia will really be a really critical one for us. I think this might be the second last one before some just quick key takeaways, but the marine spatial planning that's going on was very impressive. It's being done. So it's being led by the Federal Maritime and Hydrographic Agency, and they have done a lot of advanced work to really help proponents to have all the necessary information when it comes to looking at how they're going to bid. So enabling them to have the most competitive bids. So they're doing the environmental, the meta-ocean, the shipping, all of those pieces of work to sort of create, really clear pictures of these offshore areas for proponents. We saw this sort of graphic quite a lot. Apparently, I think it's called like a flying geese or goose or something. You can kind of see, I kept seeing it as a paintbrush. I don't know if other people see it that way, but I thought it was quite impressive because you just see the complexity, of the North Sea, of really any area. There's going to be so much going on that we need to be considering. And I think it's, the work that was being done by the agency to do this in advance was really impressive. They sort of set out their plans to organise, develop and protect. I think that was a really nice sort of set of motivations to have with it when they're doing these development plans and looking at the site investigations and the suitability. They're also doing these site development plans, so doing those with the predefined areas where they'll complete the site investigations and have that necessary information. So it's really making sure proponents can enter the process and be the most competitive process it can be, because everyone has all that information from the get-go. So it really provides good long-term outlook, reducing time for sort of projects to have to do this work, but also sets really good baselines. And I know that's something that has been discussed quite a bit in industry in Australia, is having a good, regional marine baseline studies completed. So it was really positive to see this led by the federal agency. So some just quick takeaways, final takeaways from me before I hand back to Llewelyn. As I mentioned, we could talk all day long. One of the comments that was made was, there's going to be, there's lots of hurdles to overcome, and we need to look to overcome them one at a time. Industry's already made every mistake there is to make, and more mistakes will probably be made, and that's something we're going to encounter here in our industry as we develop. We won't set it up perfectly every time, and when we hit those hurdles, we go, okay, assess it, and we keep moving forward. When it comes to transmission, we heard some really great things about transmission. Not all of it was that we were able to share, but I think the key summary when it comes to transmission is now they're looking and going, well, how can we make sure we're setting up for the long term for hitting that 70 gigawatt target? And I think that's something in Australia too. We go back to setting a target, then we can be going, well, how can we set up transmission for that target? Again, reducing spaghettification from the outset, because we're really preparing for the long term. We got asked about hydrogen so much. You would have thought we were on a hydrogen delegation, but really considering the role of hydrogen, a bit longer term again. But in Germany, all the renewable generation for hydrogen needs to be, the generation for hydrogen all has to be new. They can't use existing grids. So offshore wind is going to complement that really well. And so that was something that I think longer term, especially when we're looking at the superpower scenario for Australia, offshore wind will play a really good role. I asked someone about nuclear and they said the public didn't like it and they didn't want it, so they got rid of it. And I think that was just a really good, clear answer when it comes to nuclear. I think the other thing that I took away from everything was it has been done, and it can be done, so we need to get it done. Offshore wind, it exists. It was great seeing it over there, and really putting it into perspective that this is a thriving and well-established industry. And so I look forward to Australia also having a thriving offshore wind industry in the not too distant future. I'll hand over to Llewelyn for his remarks.
Thanks, Morgan. No slides from my side, and just a few follow-on remarks from me. Really to echo what Morgan said, this was a really informative visit, and in addition to those who helped put it together for the delegation, also obviously thanks to all the people who spent time with us, meeting with us and sharing their insights. A point that was made by a number of our interlocutors in Germany was that in some aspects of offshore wind, there's a real second mover advantage. And what that means is that Australia has the opportunity to learn from German experience, successes, as well as the challenges in building out the industry. And I really do think that initiatives such as this are really crucial to help realize that potential which is there. I wanted to just briefly make remarks around three different categories of things. The first is around the importance of integrated planning. The second is around thinking about economic benefits. And then the third is around the area of innovation and how to account for that. So on integrated planning for the offshore sector, you could really, one of the things that we saw actually on the first day hearing from the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate was the development of planning around the industry over time, you know, with targets increasing. I think there's currently 8.5 gigawatts in operation in Germany, but interim targets are now with a stretch goal of 70 gigawatts operating by 2045, but that's something which has developed over time as the industry has matured. Now, of course, kind of announcing targets is fun and an easy thing to do. Achieving those targets is the challenge. And we heard some really great information on day one from the German Foundation for Offshore Wind Energy. And also from Adelphi, who gave us an overview of the development of the offshore wind industry around policy within Germany. Amongst a lot of useful content that was provided to then, a key message that I took away was the importance of consistency as well as flexible policy supports in order to ensure that developers and supporting industries have got confidence in a project pipeline that it's going to be there. One of the things that we talked about a bit was the drop-off actually in installations in Germany, particularly between 2020 and 2022, when there were, in 2021, I think it was, there were no capacity additions added. And an important reason for that we talked about was because of some uncertainty that was introduced into the targets, that is the pipeline, as well as the compensation scheme which had been put in place for the for offshore wind, and that's something that, you know, in research that we've done around the Asia Pacific, that people have repeated to us in expert surveys looking at different markets in APAC, that certainty around pipeline is a really important part of what's needed in order for investment to get put in place, as well as simplification of consenting related processes as well. The other, I think, lesson around integrated planning is really around having a good governance framework in place to enable problem solving to happen, and a framework that has the involvement of government and industry and other stakeholders as well. There are different flavors of this. So in Germany, we heard about the Stiftung Offshore Windenergie, which you know, takes the structure of a foundation, but provides a platform for networking and communications between different stakeholders across government, across industry, including TSOs, manufacturers, suppliers, operators, and developers, and also finance and so on, as well as different levels of government. And, you know, the kind of existence of that platform to help solve problems in the industry and understand what's realistic, but also ambitious, is something that I think that Australia could potentially learn. And it's very much aligned with the way that people are thinking in the research space about green industry policies in general. That is not only to think about them as regulations or subsidies, or tax breaks or whatever it might be, but also think about the kind of institutional governance frameworks and the importance of problem solving as a core part of what industry policy actually is. Now, you know, you might think that Germany has a different kind of tradition. You know, it's a manufacturing powerhouse. It has a more kind of maybe cooperative way of relating, you know, government and industry working together compared to, let's say, Australia. But you do see similar kind of frameworks in place in the UK, for example, or in Scotland through SOEC, as well as within our region. So I do think that that kind of cooperative governance framework is something that we could learn more about. And with there potentially some takeaways for us, for Australia, in terms of how we want to think about solving those kinds of problems. So the second reflection I had was around industrial opportunities, and this is something that Morgan's already touched on. The visit to Cuxhaven was really instructive. The visit to the Siemens Energy Turbine Assembly Factory. We learned, I think it was Björn, who was a fantastic guide for us around the facility, about the investment that had gone in place to enable assembly of 14 megawatt turbines, where previously it had been kitted out for 11 megawatt turbines. A lot of work had gone into that. And it's always fun to visit these kind of big industrial sites, of course, because of scale and so on. But in addition to the jobs part of it, what I was really interested in is kind of components and where the components were being supplied for assembly at the port prior to shipping. Now, Europe's got a lot of good data through Wind Europe and so on about what that supply chain looks like within Europe. But obviously in the Asia Pacific, this is going to look really different. It's going to look different because of the different geography of the region, right? We've got big maritime distances that we have to think about, which looks a bit different to Europe. So I do think that there's a really crucial piece of work around understanding supply chain development within the Asia Pacific, not just for fixed bottom, but in the future for floating offshore wind. And then to think about what opportunities exist for Australia in collaboration with other countries, or, indeed for potentially Australia to supply other locations as well in a regional supply chain structure. I think that's something there is work going on, but something like the kind of governance framework I talked about should definitely pick up the issue of industrial opportunities as part of the work stream that they would engage in, not just deployment. The third and last point I wanted to make was around innovation. So Siemens Energy provided a few really great presentations to us about which really focused on innovation. So one was about the sector coupling between offshore wind and hydrogen, for example. That was really impressive, a 4-year project, 32 different members of the consortium, and somewhere in the region of 150 million euros being put behind looking at autonomous hydrogen production utilizing offshore wind. We also heard about the innovation within wind turbines, not in terms of scale, but actually in terms of improving the post-use recovery and recycling of blades and the kind of work that's going in there. And also this fantastic substation, 2 gigawatt substation, which we also learned a lot about and was a highlight for me from the presentations. You get a really strong sense from this about the really large amount of innovation which is continuing to occur within the sector, not just about scaling turbines, as we often hear about, but also in terms of improving the environmental dimensions of kit, for example, or enabling sector coupling. And obviously that's going to be the case even more for floating offshore wind, although that wasn't a strong focus of the trip on this particular time. My reflection from that's really twofold. First, I think that it's really important for policymakers to continue to engage with developers, operators, OEMs, to remain abreast of what international developments in offshore wind are around innovation and what the implications are both for what's possible and also what's cost effective. The second and slightly as yet unformed reflection on this is the need to think about how to build a proper regulatory framework that enables the updating of site plans following some kind of competitive procurement process like we've just seen in Victoria. We don't want to ignore the rules which we use to determine winning bids, for example, but we do need to allow developers flexibility so that they can update site plans and update their planning to take advantage of best-in-class technology. In the research space, I have not seen good research on that's looked at how that's being managed across different jurisdictions, and I do think that would be something really interesting to look in, because I know other markets are also grappling with that particular issue. Let me finish there. Just to note, obviously offshore wind is a big industry. It's not like importing solar panels and putting them on your roof. It's like the auto industry. There's a lot of manufacturing, there's a lot of infrastructure, there are a lot of jobs, and there are a lot of economic opportunities available there. That suggests a lot of opportunity, but it also suggests a lot of coordination as well. I think that's certainly an area where obviously industry, but also the research sector is looking forward to contributing in the months and years to come. And so we very much look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks very much for listening, and let me pass things back to Marie.
Thank you, Morgan. Thank you, Llewelyn. I think that was a brilliant summary and analysis of the trip, actually. So, yeah, a lot of topics to talk about, interesting topics. For today, we had to choose, and we chose ports, which, as you mentioned, are extremely relevant to both the build up and the build out of the offshore wind industry. So it's quite relevant to both Australia and Germany, and will continue to do so in the years to come. For this, we are lucky enough to have Marc Itgen, expert for maritime transport and port management at the Cuxhaven Port Association. We already met him during the trip, and today he will summarize and present Germany's national port strategy, which, if I remember correctly, was published quite recently, briefly after our trip. And we're curious to hear about this strategy. And with this, I hand over to Marc Itgen.
Yeah, good morning, and hello from Cuxhaven. And also thanks a lot to be part of this workshop, as well as later on the panel of the expert exchange of offshore wind today. So now starting, and thanks for the question, to give some evaluation or presentation of the port strategy, the German port strategy, which then was sent out in the end of March 2024, and with some topics which we for sure like to hear, but this then also needs some further activities from the state government as well as the federal government. And this, I think, will be and is the main topic that both then for sure has to be acted on and in line with the activity we need for the sea as well as inland ports. But I will share my presentation. Hopefully that will work. You can see my presentation.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, then I will start. So now it will be it's in full picture, I think. German port strategy presentation evaluation. I will call it afterwards a bit like a root cause, which we received from the government. So therefore, root cause in view of what we have and general topics of the motivation of the German port strategy for sure was the federal government wants to increase the competitiveness of German sea and inland ports. This, and you can see also in the paper, but this is why the federal government has adopted the national port strategy. I think very important that we and now receive a new strategy, German port strategy, also in connection with offshore wind hydrogen, I always say. So therefore, it's quite important that we have this competitiveness, and for sure in connection with and it was mentioned that we will have and must create a massive output for the installation of the offshore wind wind farms. And for sure, the efficiency in inland ports are among the most important prerequisites for prosperity and economic success in Germany. This then for sure generates some questions, and so therefore it was what role do ports play in the German economy? This I think is, and if we see the seaports, I think that's in the income or the ports which then give us the income of the economy, but also that the ports must be very effective in what kind of goods, and especially in Cuxhaven, we call it multi-purpose harbor, that is the best possible, most effective, and always up to date, by knowing that all other ports, especially the Netherlands and Denmark, that we then for sure have all these infra as well as superstructure available. Why does Germany need a national port strategy? For sure, we have to give a connection to all parts of the port, but also in connection to reach the sea as well as inland ports. And what importance does the national strategy have for the federal government? This then for sure is also a quite important question. Otherwise, the most important questions are: what are the objectives of the national port strategy? There were given out some 138 topics, and what concrete measures are planned. This then also includes these topics. I think 140 is quite massive. Otherwise, then also some already known topics we were, and the federal government, the state government was not quite good at on these topics the last year, especially the planning and the approval process. So in general, the approvals we need for some further expansion and extension of the harbors in general. What are the objectives of the national port strategy? These are mentioned here on this slide. Not to go deeply in, but these are the facts, and for sure, most important to develop ports into sustainable nodes, energy hubs for the energy transition. Therefore, then also Cuxhaven is on the map, has to be on the map, because Cuxhaven, with its offshore industry center, I think will be and has to be play a big role in these energy transition, and more specific, the transformation of the industry in Germany, especially with the energy we need, and this are green energy, and for sure this then has to be covered with offshore and onshore wind. What concrete measures are planned? Strengthening competitiveness, energy transition, digital transformation, training and employment, transport and communication infrastructure. Communication infrastructure also, and especially if we talk about the digitalization, there we, and in Cuxhaven, we will have shortly the digital twin. This then also shows we need some more infrastructure on these topics. Pretty fast, also that connection is given, and tracking of the goods, and have a lean process on every topic, which then has to be deleted to digital. Yeah, then I already said, I will call it, if we take the German port strategy as a root cause analysis from our point of view as owner of the harbor, as well as the partners we have. Some things already given: objectives of the national port strategy, 5 strategic goals, and what I mentioned, 139 concrete measures. But this then for sure ensure financial design of the measures. That's then hopefully given, and actually we see a big gap in what's mentioned and also what's needed. Actually, the state government gives up to 40 million euros for every single harbor in, not for every single, for the amount of harbors we have in Germany. So it's only 30 up to 40 million, but 38 million euros. And the request is that the state government for sure, and the harbors generally needs up to 400 million euros every year, so that we are then competitive to other ports, mentioned Denmark as well as the Netherlands. Concrete measures to be taken in as minimum and necessary goals. Hopefully that's then given, so that the measures not only mentioned, so that the measures and also the goals for the next years. Therefore then also that the more or less we do not have time always, and I'm a logistic guy. What we do not have is time, and for the next years, and taking the goals we have in offshore wind installation, we only have left 6 years for the 30 gigawatt goal. So therefore, what we do not have is time. Therefore, we have to speed up all processes, especially the concrete measures. The federal government has to be more sensitive by taking ports as a general must-have and industrial standard. industrial nation. So we have to say we are in industrial nation in a moving process by become best possible more green, but also the transformation itself needs some to strengthen the harbor activities so that we then can import all the goods we need, but also build up and install our next generation of the power plants, which then will be given by offshore wind. The strategy indicates that the government has a plan or will have a plan of sustainable, effective and safe ports. By taking this as a must do for sure, federal government and state government. So both have to be part of these activities. And in Germany, sometimes it's a bit tricky to bring all together by knowing we have a federal government. So the federal states then also have to be in line with all these activities. And hopefully you have then also available the money we need. This and best possible also in connection with the federal government. As we see, and the money given by the federal government, also by the state government, also knowing that we as Cuxhaven received the 100 million additional to the federal government money, and knowing that we will have available more or less 300 million euros for the extension or gap closure activities of berths 5 to 7. This is and will be given, and now the process has been started so that we will see best possible and the company end of this year, who then will be owner of the berths 5 to 7. The process has been started mid of May, so that the money is available. Otherwise, also additional 100 million euro are needed from the economy. There, then we will see who then will be the additional partner here in Cuxhaven. Therefore, that's also and always important that we have a balance of partners here in Cuxhaven. Knowing that we have strong partners already in Cuxhaven, but the balance must be and has to be given so that also a different kind of interests are available here in Cuxhaven. Yeah, the goals already given, 30 gigawatt, 40 gigawatt, 70 gigawatt, 70 gigawatt by 45. And additional, and that's then partly, and so therefore I will not say halfway the truth, but also 10 gigawatt of offshore wind hydrogen. So it will be our then 1 and then X areas where we then will have additional 10 gigawatt of offshore wind hydrogen by knowing hydrogen production, the energy itself, but then also hydrogen in these areas with no connection to the overall grid in Germany. This and also commitment by the federal government to contribute proportionally to the cost of expanding the offshore terminal in the port of Cuxhaven. This I mentioned already, so therefore was quite good and in connection and partly to read in connection with the German port strategy. Otherwise, I think it also was a must-have because the port of Cuxhaven, actually the only port in Germany which can have this output of what's needed in offshore wind. But otherwise, there are then also some root causes or questions or how the government for sure has to act in the next years. Ports are sustainable hubs for the energy transition. This is to be said with a clear focus on strategic planning and financing, because the energy transition has been politically decided. This is a given. Ports financing to be given by 400 million. I already said, actually we have 40 million, so we have to by 10 times this money for the next years, so that the harbors will have the best output in connection inland as well as seaports. German ports to be taken as energy transition backbone of the green economy in Germany and Europe with its partners. For sure, there are also port alliance needed which we then partly started with Denmark, Netherlands, France, UK, so that we then, and Belgium for sure, so that we then hopefully in connection can handle these targets. Also by reading the in Europe that we will have up to 300 gigawatt in the European waters. Awareness at German ports, preliminary and secure prosperity towards a sustainable economy. And now this end from my end.
Thank you, Marc Itgen. That was very informative, and I think it became very clear that, yeah, the port strategy was a good and necessary first step, but certainly not a sufficient step yet. So much to do on ports in Germany as well. And yeah, with this, we move to our first panel, which will actually offer diverse perspectives on the importance of ports, including from Taiwan, actually, who has entered the offshore wind market quite recently and is also situated in the Asia Pacific region. So quite some relevant information for Australia there as well. Yeah, the session will be moderated by Morgan, and she will also introduce our panelists to you.
Thanks, Marie. Yeah, we've got a very good lineup. So hopefully we can have plenty of time for questions. So yeah, just a reminder as well, if you do have questions, please put them in the chat, or you're welcome to raise your hand as well and come off mute and ask them. So I'll ask each of our panelists to just do a quick run through, a quick sort of 5-minute introduction about sort of who they are and their organisation, and then we'll jump into the Q&A. So I might give Marc a moment to catch his breath from his last presentation, and I'll ask David Chang, the co-head of Asia Pacific for the World Forum of Offshore Wind, to come to introduce himself and tell us a bit about the World Forum for Offshore Wind. Over to you, David.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. So my name is David. I work for the World Forum Offshore Wind. I think we share a lot of relevance in terms of Germany and the expansion to Australia and to Taiwan. So the past 3 years, we have executed a program called the German Offshore Wind Initiative, where we facilitated some German companies to access markets such as Taiwan, Japan, and the US. So I actually have a slide or two to share, if it's okay, to illustrate what WFO is. So if I could just quickly bring that up. Okay. So WFO is actually short for World Forum Offshore Wind. Right, here we go. Okay, so we call ourselves WFO, it's shorter. The full name is World Forum Offshore Wind. We are a not-for-profit organization. And so we facilitate development of offshore wind in general. And we have lots of corporate members, such as the ones that you've seen. At the moment, we have roughly about 125 corporate members participating. And we gather valuable insight and information from these corporate members to support us, to assist in how we can develop offshore wind in specific markets. At the moment, we are quite active in Taiwan and Japan, and of course, Australia is a huge interest to us, and hopefully we could find and navigate how we can facilitate development there as well. So just to give you a very quick context. So under the WFO umbrella, we have 3 major committees, and within these committees, we discuss critical information and development aspects regarding either technical or policy or technology development in the near future. One of the most active agenda here will be definitely the Floating Offshore Wind Committee, which is held by our committee members and with 7 subcommittees in separate agenda as well. They're very, very active, and they provide a good release of white papers accordingly to provide further information on technical aspect and also logistic aspect as well. The other committees, such as the Hydrogen Committee, which is the most recent one, and also the Dispute Committee as well. And yeah, so I am the contact person, or one of the contact person for WFO in APAC region. Hopefully, we could have a really good discussion as we move into the panel topic a little bit later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David, for that overview. I might hand now over to Sohn, who's the Senior Manager for Policy and Regulatory Affairs at the Association for German Offshore Wind Operators. Hans, if you could give us a bit of an overview of the association, that would be great.
Yes, thank you very much. Happy to do so, and thanks for the invitation. Good to see you again. Happy to share some slides. So, BWO is the representing the political interests of the offshore wind industry in Germany. We started as a group of operators and developers of offshore wind farms, and opened the club up to the entire supply chain last year, and we've grown more than 50% since last year, since that we've taken that step. And so we think we are a good central point of contact for politicians and authorities based in Berlin, mainly looking at the German market, but also wish to understand the interconnections with other regions. So good to be here. And here are some of our members. As I said, it's growing almost every week, not as impressive as VWO or WFO's list, but growing fast. And happy to hear that some of our members will also have big plans for Australian offshore wind. So see some interconnections here. I'd be happy to give an overview of how we look at ports, maybe now, maybe later, up to you. Share some slides and give a short overview.
Yeah, if you've got some slides over your
yes, sure. Yeah, happy to fill my 5 minutes, not only with introduction of BWO, but also with what we think about ports. We believe that ports is a transboundary challenge. We usually look at Germany when we talk about the build out of offshore wind, of the targets that we already mentioned here, 30 gigawatts in 2030 and all the others. But we've learned that in the past, especially German projects in the North Sea and in the Baltic Sea were mostly built from ports in the Netherlands and Denmark. And they are a bit more advanced in some respects with what they've done in the past years. In terms of offshore wind supporting ports. And next slide will explain why that happened. And here's just an overview of the expansion we need. And Marc has already mentioned the case of Germany. It's not really easy to see how this will happen. Case of Cuxhaven was a bit of a challenge to get the financing straight. As we learned, happy to have it in place now, and good to see the operation being tendered. So this is how it all happened. Llewelyn talked about consistency, and that's one of the key points. We had some good early years of offshore wind from 2014 maybe to 2019, and then we had this huge gap that nobody in the industry wanted. And just have to understand that it's not a market phenomenon. It's just the way offshore wind is being tendered and the rhythm by which it is tendered, and how the grid planning is moving on. So that's not what industry wanted to see, and it's created a lot of mess, a lot of damage. And so we are still in the ramping up phase here, 2024 right now. Next year will be big, but then some more difficult years ahead before we enter this huge peak, which is again causing headaches in terms of some scarcities we see, some bottlenecks, because here this arrow is indicating the pace at which offshore wind is supposed to be developed in the 2030s, which is a very positive development. For like a stable development of 4 gigawatts per year is perfect for infrastructure planning, for everything we will need, but somehow we will manage to get around these years. And of course, as an industry group, we like the ambition. We think it's good to have these have this peak. And my work is mostly centered around how to make that possible. And as Marc already said, there is a gap in Germany. It's a bit unclear how big it is. There's evaluation going on right now. I think it's a bit late. German government has asked the German Energy Agency to look at capacity gaps and just to quantify them. We'll see what comes out of that endeavor. And we know that there's some plans around. This one is in Bremerhaven. New build ports or enlargement of ports, of strengthening of existing areas. And that's really needed fast, as Marc already said. I think those are the main topics that we need to talk about. Happy to talk about the questions you raised as well around biodiversity and other topics. But I'll stop here for the moment.
Thanks, Hans, and that's prompted some good topics for the panel discussion as well. Now I'll hand over to Marc again. We've obviously heard from Marc before, the expert for maritime transport and port management at the Cuxhaven Port Association. Marc, did you want to speak to us or give us an overview of the Cuxhaven Port Association before we kick off?
Yeah, for sure. Generally, the Port Association for sure is a combination of all partners we have in Cuxhaven, actually with 80 members, nearly 80 members. So therefore, it's more or less the overview. I will show how we are acting, what's available in Cuxhaven, and also, but I will share that the harbor for sure is fully packed already. Therefore, and expansion as well as further and additional harbor space is needed in Germany, and it's mentioned by Hans. Bremerhaven also. In the past, we not mentioned Bremerhaven because we was in some kind of challenging phases in who then will be the best port in offshore wind. Otherwise, now we are also communicated that that Bremerhaven is needed, and all other ports in in the northern part of Germany also for service activities. So therefore, we are just changing our wording, our communication in general. We have close connection to all partners, and this is why the harbor for sure, and especially in Cuxhaven, is packed, fully packed, and this partly offshore components, but most of the parts are onshore. So therefore, Cuxhaven also a big hub for onshore components, especially Vestas, GE, but also other partners, so that we then facing the problem, and especially the dent we had from 2018 to 2022, that for sure the harbor cannot be empty that time. Therefore, we switched and moved to onshore wind, and this happened. So therefore, the harbor quite packed. And packed means we have no space left for further activities, actually. And Cuxhaven also, and especially in offshore wind, this is forth and back, that also components from far east will be come to Cuxhaven. handled in Cuxhaven, and also for the production, especially production in the, from Siemens, that these components then will be sail in. Therefore, then also additional space is needed for the in and outbound. Therefore, we decided to go for the gap closure of the berths 5 to 7. This then will happen best possible end of the year, and this then will create additional nearly 35 up to 38 hectares. With these additional area, we will for sure and best possible can handle 2 wind farms in parallel. In parallel means that we will have the installation with big and great components getting bigger and bigger, and actually in Cuxhaven, the 14 megawatt turbine in series will be now in production, but also this then has to be handled via these key sites. And also with Titan Wind, we will have these additional monopiles, and also this with a new dimension of weight as well as size. So the footprint of a new monopile in the next generation is of up to 1,200 square meters. So therefore quite impressive, massive, and therefore we need space. Not only the berths 5 to 7 are on the agenda in Cuxhaven, we also have the harbor extension area by net up to 130 hectares with a heavy load bridge as connection from the actual harbor area to the new harbor and harbor extension, which then will be in the south of the actual harbor. There you see some animation of the bridge itself, but also the harbor extension. So therefore that's then needed also for suppliers for Siemens, suppliers for Titan, these partners, and also looking forward to being part of the production in Cuxhaven, and this then directly in Cuxhaven. So therefore further facilities as well as production facilities are needed. The new heavy load bridge will can handle up to 5,000 tons. This then also by knowing that the monopiles, and if they have to go to the south of the harbor area, these new monopiles will have a weight of 2,500 up to 3,500 tons per piece. These are the dimension in future. So therefore, also the blade tip of the next generation of wind will be up to 270 meters, and the overall construction then also, and the hub will have a height of 160 meters nearly. Yeah, so therefore Cuxhaven also #1 in onshore wind. So therefore onshore also to consider, because #1 in Germany, #2 in Europe, and biggest seaport for Vestas worldwide, with 3,500 up to 4,000 components. And this then also already, and we handled in Cuxhaven 10.5 gigawatt in sum up, which when we handled also in connection to and brought it to Austria, southern part of Germany, as well as Switzerland. So Cuxhaven is also there generally a hub for onshore wind. Yeah, this is from my end and the impression of the harbor in Cuxhaven.
Thanks, Marc. That was good, really good summary. I might just stay with you actually on a question. It's really impressive to see sort of the next phase of development that you've got planned for Cuxhaven, but I wondered if you could just take us back to maybe a bit the earlier stages. Obviously in Australia, we're looking now at how we can start to develop our ports to be capable to support offshore wind. Do you talk a bit about how Cuxhaven sort of in the earlier phases was able to sort of realise that economic opportunity and develop to support offshore wind? And also just to tie into that as well, you know, how you were able to sort of bring in the opportunity of the Siemens Gamesa assembly plan and have that approach of attracting industry as well to help complement the port.
Yeah, the connection to the partners was quite a massive marketing tool we have to provide by knowing that a decision in this amount and this financing situation is not given by the other day. So therefore, it and especially Siemens, there we were in a fight with Bremerhaven, and it took more or less 10 years that we received a decision from Siemens Gamesa. Also by knowing that they had their factory in Brande, and at that time the factory was quite fine with the sizes of the blades, 5 sizes of the turbines, but at the end then they realized also that will become bigger and bigger. And in Cuxhaven they started with a 7 megawatt, and now they are up to the 14 megawatt, and this in a short period of time, up to 5 years only. So therefore it was quite massive, and at the end the right decision to go to Cuxhaven for sure, but also knowing that they need space. And at that time we were a bit more with a strategy and clear focus on that the harbor has to be developed. We were a bit upfront of Bremerhaven, so that was the only or the key to success, that the decision then was made for Cuxhaven. Because the investment we took the last years was also that we didn't have any benefit. It was just that we had the area, and the area or having the area available was then that Siemens decided to go to Cuxhaven. So the investment and the trade strategy and the clear plan, I think, is needed also to give a clear or general good feedback to the market.
Investment and clear strategy, very good points. And I will say I think it was the only day on the delegation that we had any rain was when we went for the tour of the port, but it didn't dampen our moods at all, because everyone was very excited, I think, standing by the nacelles and the blades, and it was our first time on the trip getting up close to everything. So yeah, it was very exciting to get out to the port of Cuxhaven. There was a beautiful spot.
Do you mind if I add a few thoughts from from a Bremerhaven perspective, just to highlight the importance of political stability, or the stability of political goals, and maybe also biodiversity considerations that I found in your questions. Because from a Bremerhaven perspective, they were planning in the early days when we did have good offshore wind targets that were later cut back. So during the good times, Bremerhaven was planning to build that kind of offshore wind terminal. But then the central federal government came in and said, no, we like to cut down the offshore wind targets. And there was also some issue with 1 or 2 species. And so the plans were taken to court. And the court said, okay, we have the species issue here, and we don't have clear good targets. So yeah, let's scrap these plans for the time being. And so the project died. And I don't know, it was less than a year later that the new government came in and just came in with a big target. So now we're in need of any kind of good port in Germany. And yeah, so we lost a number of years from a Bremerhaven perspective to have another good facility there.
Just building on that note around sort of the biodiversity concerns with port development, not just at Cuxhaven, but I guess other areas in Germany and in Europe, has biodiversity sort of impacted port development sort of much more extensively. It's sort of a big concern, and something that is already looking like it will delay port development in Australia. How has that impacted the ability to support offshore wind industry? Maybe
do you want me to take the question?
Yep. keep building on.
Be happy to. Maybe Marc, I can.
You can start, Hans, for sure.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. It is a big issue, as I just tried to explain. It can just be a hurdle for major port projects. There's also some talk about biodiversity concerns in Rostock right now, the Baltic Sea. And so there's an initiative by the German Länder. That's like maybe important to understand that it's not the federal government that is in charge of ports in Germany, it's the federal states. So yeah, Bremen and Lower Saxony have initiated some move to make the port development, yeah, just declare it as being in the overriding public interest, as we already have for offshore wind. Build out of offshore wind is in the overriding public interest. It's in the Offshore Wind Act, but not ports as of the moment, and they would like to see that same development to have yeah, better arguments in case anyone finds out about future issues, conflicts with biodiversity, and take that to court.
I don't know that one. We'll get that one across the line over here, but it's interesting to hear how it's managed in other parts of the world.
It's just an ongoing process, and it's not in the law yet, but they'd like to see it because they know these issues could come back in the future.
Excellent.
Otherwise, we then also have to face the massive workload, and it's not only installation, it's also O&M phase, but it's also, and beginning of 2030, we will partly face the decommissioning phase already. So therefore, harbor space is needed, and also with the arguments Hans said, maybe and partly to be taken, but I think, yeah, different regime has to be taken for that additional space is available as possible.
Well to hear now, talking about using the ports for decommissioning. Yeah. All right, David, I might move over to you. I was wondering if you could share some insights or sort of recent lessons learned from the building up of the offshore wind industry in Taiwan, and obviously specifically in relation to the port infrastructure, and maybe any challenges that you've seen there.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I just want to reflect on what you know, my panel members have mentioned about how policies can influence infrastructure development, such as ports. For Taiwan, for example, let me actually, if it's okay, I'll just please return to my slide. Just want to give you some little bit of perspective on how things Taiwan, or how Taiwan is going here. So just to give you a very brief general perspective, do you know where Taiwan is? Taiwan is so small. It's there. Okay, so the size in comparison, when I learned about the renewable energy target in capacity wise for Australia, it's super exciting in comparison to Taiwan. I mean, Taiwan is also very exciting, but just give you a perspective, that is what we're talking about here. I'll give you another shot of how Taiwan looks like. It's a inverted banana, and the best wind that we have is between the Taiwan Straits. So we're neighboring to China. So this is where most of the offshore wind farms are located in Taiwan. And one of the most popular ports here is going to be the Taichung port, of course. So there are 4 main commercial ports in Taiwan. Taichung port is amongst one of them. And then we have the Keelung port, which is up north. Then we have the Kaohsiung port, which is down south. And we have the Hualien port, which is on the eastern side, but mainly on the west coast of Taiwan is where the focus is. So just to give you a basic perspective there, the little triangles in purplish pink, they are the potential sites for the existing offshore wind grounds. So I just want to illustrate that these ports infrastructure development is actually highly in relation to our political planning. So this is a net zero emission plan from the National Development Council from Taiwan. It was published 2 years ago. And so if you could see that by 2050, they are trying to increase renewable energy, including offshore wind development, up to between 60 to 70%. But I want to put it in perspective, the self-generated electricity or energy by Taiwan is only 3% of the entirety. The remaining 97% of the electricity are imported by different means of medium. So this is the type of scale that we're looking at. The port infrastructure strategy previously done was on the basis of the current scale, which was to achieve 5.7 gigawatts by 2025. Unfortunately, this plan is delayed, but nonetheless, ports actually utilize that political strategy to render their investment accordingly. So right now, for example, for the Port of Taiwan, there are 4 major themes that is happening there. So it's turbine pre-assembly area, the localized manufacturing parts, GWO training center and facilities, and O&M base. These facilities or the scale of facilities are designed in according to or relation to the national renewable energy targets, which is 5.7 gigawatts up to 2025. And right now we are moving into the round 3 auction, which is a total of 15 gigawatts up to 2030. So this is the type of scale that we're looking for in consideration. Here's a shot of the Port of Taichung with the expansion plans up to 2024, which is this year. So this is basically what we're looking at here. A closer shot in relation to more offshore wind related facilities over here. So what I want to demonstrate here is that for Taiwan, for example, renewable energy is highly political, and I think that shares a little bit similarity to most of the countries, but because the infrastructure is backed by the government side. So the consideration is in relationship. Right now, we are talking about the pre-commercial floating offshore wind demonstration in Taiwan. And this will have a pull and push effect with the Port of Taichung, for example, on how they want to maximize the infrastructure in consideration to height, to weight, and also affecting the communities around in terms of investment as well, employment opportunities. Also, some of the local stakeholders, which has, especially the fisheries, they have a lot of comments in regards to the expansion of ports and also the facilities of what we have in the ports. So that's just a little bit of a basic background in regards to how we look at ports development in Taiwan, for example.
It's really good context and interesting to see, yeah, the scale of development. I recognize well we've got quite a grouping of different like industry associations here, which is quite unique. I've never been on a meeting with so many other industry associations. But I was going to ask you, David, how does WFO sort of look to sort of support the growth of the offshore wind industry, and how do you collaborate internationally?
Okay, so how WFO operates in Taiwan is a little bit in complement to other trade offices and chambers, I think. So we usually do a very mild lobby type of work. So because we have such a large database of corporates and also in good relationship with various trade offices, we identify some of the future or upcoming agendas of the industry. But instead of taking the agenda straight to the central government is that we collaborated with local companies to understand what is the real bottleneck. And so for topics such as ports development or for floating in conjunction with floating, is that we want to identify how and why it is necessary to develop or strengthen the renewable energy such as offshore wind development in Taiwan to help the government to achieve their targets. So we have collaborated with on many agendas with the economic affairs as well as the energy administration. We've also been connecting with the National Development Council to identify some of the bottlenecks and hopefully to provide certain solutions that is not necessarily directly to the exact investment of the infrastructure itself, but to relieve some of the pressure, allowing the infrastructure to be invested more easily. So one of the challenges over here in Taiwan, for example, is not actually just about the physical deployment or installation of facilities. It's actually whether or not it's feasible to invest in offshore wind in Taiwan. So if you can sell your product, which is, for example, the developers will be going after PPAs. If the PPA market is extremely restricted, I think no matter how easy infrastructure is, it's not going to be a market. It's not going to be feasible. But if the PPA market is more accessible, then I think the challenges of any infrastructure development or industry development will be justified. So this is the type of work that WFO is trying to communicate and bridge between the industry side, local and international industry side, with the government sector, and hopefully we can find a remedy for both sides.
Thanks. And Hans, maybe similar sort of question to yourself around how BWO has sort of taken the approach of helping to advocate for port development, and any insights on your role into the port strategy as well, because that was a really positive thing to hear about from Marc. So yeah, looks like a really great tool.
Yeah, this is good to have a strategy, but unfortunately we cannot learn from it which port will be available at what time and how the development will be financed. That's what we'd like to see, and that's one of the things that we've been pushing for together with northern states and the Association of Port Operators. So as I try to explain, we're looking at this expansion peak around 2030, and we know that we don't have the capacity, like port capacity. We neither have the port capacity to support that peak, nor do we see it right now to support the long-term stable expansion pace of 4 gigawatts per year. So we know that we need more space, but we cannot expect the government to optimize it for the peak. So what we're doing right now is trying to organize a dialogue between port operators and offshore wind developers on how to come up with maybe creative ideas on how to work some workaround with these challenging years. I know it's been done like that in the early days as well. We didn't have perfect huge ports for the early phase of offshore wind development in Germany. Not sure how it will work in Australia, but yeah, what operators usually like to see is to have like this one huge space for a long time, and ports like to have more flexibility, like very generally spoken. And I think it's important to bring these two perspectives together, and as Marc said, enable ports to have that multi-purpose thing going. And yeah, offshore wind has very special needs. So if you talk about cars, you might not need the very first row, and not heavy-duty quaysides, but yeah, that's just what offshore wind needs. And it's good to see the development of like the onshore development of plans of Cuxhaven with the bridge and things you can do a little bit further back there, but the huge components, probably you don't want to see them further away from the quayside. They need to be right up front.
Thanks. So we're coming right up to time, but I've seen a question I have been ignoring in the chat. So just quickly, Marc, a question: what is the furthest project that Cuxhaven has serviced from the port for installation?
The last project, or
how far? So I guess
how far?
Sort of builds, yeah, sort of builds into sort of, and I guess that the second part of the questions around lessons, which I might just a quick note to the other speakers as I'll ask for one final sort of word of encouragement or quick lesson learned or something that you can leave for the Victorian and New South Wales proponents, or for all of the Australian offshore wind proponents, I should say. But for you, Marc, I think it's interesting for us to see all the different ports that service offshore wind sort of in the North Sea, but from the port of Cuxhaven, what is sort of the further side? So let's say it's like sailing time, a project to a project.
Yeah, it depends on how the installation or the service partner then will be, or installation partner will be, and is able to take some further or some additional sailing time. As we take actually, and I think it's still the benchmark in Europe, taking SPAC, and they then also provide some parts to Scotland, to the Netherlands, to France. So therefore, I think the most important topic is and will be what kind of services, how professional you provide the services in the harbor. Therefore, then also, and by knowing that the harbor areas generally in Europe are squeezed out, that they then also take some further sailing time. The last projects we assist with in the Llewelyn cluster, but also on the border to the Netherlands. But generally, I think at one point the sailing time is to take as a reference for sure, but it will not be the final or is not the topic for the final decision which port will be and is able to provide such services. Also taking the O&M phase. So therefore, the sailing time is in between. It could be and or it will be best possible that they for sure always take the pin into the harbor and where is the shortest sailing time. But I think that is not the final argument in future.
Oh, it's good. It's good to hear that there's. It sounds like you're spoilt for choice over there. Just conscious of time, as I said, so maybe David, we'll go to you. If you could just quickly a quick sort of lesson learned or anything you think will be a really good final note for us to think about for the Australian offshore wind market.
Thank you. I think I have to highlight the importance of integrated strategies with policies. I think that will make a tremendous difference in regards to infrastructure development such as ports. So as you could see earlier on my illustration, that the port structure is in relation to the targets of offshore wind development, and now the government is considering about floating, which then find themselves, I think the port is not enough. So now they have to revise, and it's always a big challenge to do so. So I think the intricate integration of policy in a longer term should be well considered for ports development, and also the the surrounding facilities accordingly, just to make us and also the industry's life much easier in the near future to run. So I think integration of policies is a priority when we consider developments such as port facilities.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Really great point there, David. Hans.
Yeah. As I said, political stability is probably the most important topic also for ports. We have a federal election coming up next year, and I would like to see the same ambition from the future government as we have seen from the current one. We don't take that as given, as we've learned from the past, especially when conservative dominated governments come in. In Germany, you could not be 100% sure if that would be the case. So that's what we're pushing for, and therefore we stress, as Llewelyn said, the economic benefits of offshore wind built out, and not only the climate protection effects. So that's one of the points that we are raising and trying to be heard.
Excellent, thanks, Hans. And Marc, did you have a final note to finish us on?
Yeah, partly as always that we have a clear focus on the transformation and for sure the green energy, and that we then hopefully will have, and partly as Hans mentioned, that we have a stable vote for the activities we started, and no dents will come up, and no dents will be a part of the offshore wind development, the offshore wind installation. So therefore, yeah, a clear strategy for the next 25 years, also by knowing that it will be stable the economy and will generate a clear transformation, green transformation in Germany as well as Europe.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Marc, David, and Hans. I'll hand back to Marie. And yeah, appreciate your time. And I'm sure anyone with any questions you have can reach out to the panelists or myself, and we'll be more than happy to speak further. So thanks all, and yeah, hand back to you, Marie.
Thank you.
Yeah, and sorry to interrupt, Marie. I already mentioned I have to leave, so we'll say thank you, and thanks for being part of this workshop, and for sure. Good luck, and if there are some questions will pop up afterwards, I also will answer this. So please forward the questions which then will come from the audience. Thanks, and
Yes.
yeah, have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Marc.
Thank you, Marc, Itgen. That was really, really nice to have you, and we'll pass on the questions. That's a very kind offer.
Yeah, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Great. Yeah. And also thank you to everyone else on this panel. I think that was super informative, and we could have a whole workshop on ports, probably lots to talk about, and a lot of considerations. But I hope this gave a good first overview for everyone. And yeah, we're now moving to the second part of our workshop, which I think is equally interesting. We will now look into the most recent developments in Germany and Australia in terms of offshore wind. Quite a bit has happened since our trip in March, I think, which is very encouraging. And for this, we will again hear from Hans Sohn, who you already met in our previous session, and he will tell you a bit about the recent developments in Germany and the EU. And he will be followed by Susie Kropman, who also joined our trip in March and is the manager for offshore renewable energy at DCCEEW, and is closely involved in regulatory processes in Australia. She will provide insights into Australian developments. But first, Hans Sohn.
Yes, thank you very much. I again did prepare some slides, and sharing them now. And presentation mode. Please start now. Yes, yeah, happy to talk about some of the opportunities and challenges we see for offshore wind in Germany for the coming years. And yeah, so a short overview of what some of the messages that I'm bringing here. Just looking again at the expansion acceleration challenge, talk about some auction rules in Germany, and then two parts that are related with the European Union and developments at that level. And yeah, we've seen the site development plan before, spatial development efforts by the German competent authority BSH. And yeah, last but not least, I'd like to make a few points about industrial capacities and the skilled workforce we need for all what we like to see in waters and elsewhere related to offshore wind. So yeah, I'll probably skip this part about BWO, as you already heard it in the previous panel. Beautiful members we have. Yes, I'd like to come back to that slide. As I said earlier, related to ports, that's a challenge for all we are doing. Of course, not only for ports, but also for industrial capacity, for availability of vessels, etc. So yeah, again, if you look at this development, what you'd like to see and what my message should be to policymakers in Germany and Europe and elsewhere in Australia, make this this expansion as stable and as reliable as possible. What we see here is an effort by the German government that we like to squeeze in as much capacity as possible. They came in late 2021 and started in 2022 and have made every effort to just accelerate this build out of offshore wind, and that's what they could come up with, like a huge peak here, 2029, 2030, followed by this level of 4 gigawatts per year, which is basically good, but yeah, in many ways also a challenge because yeah, as I try to explain with the board's map, you do not only see that kind of development in Germany, but also in other regions like Netherlands. They're also targeting 70 gigawatts in the long term and have big plans for yeah, the later or the time around 2030. So it will be difficult to rely on their resources from a German perspective and vice versa. So what we need to see here is trying to embed this chart into yeah, more of a European perspective, because supply chain operates at that level, if not globally. So when they try to speed up the development of offshore wind, government just made the auctions really big. Last year, 8.8 gigawatts were tendered. This year, 8 gigawatts as well. The gray part here is just being tendered as we speak. We don't have the results yet. There's a dynamic auction going on, and we're expecting to see the results yeah, probably later this month. It's 2.5 gigawatts. Here are these two sides, and 11.2 and 12.3 up for grabs. It's not centrally pre-investigated, so you do not fully know what you're getting. Therefore, you want to have a good confidence in your ability to take that risk. And the rule is basically set by the government. Please show us what you're willing to pay for that. Last year, that raised some 13 billion euros. Talk about a bit later how that that amount will be used. And it was basically won by two major companies. And what we as a group are saying for future auctions, it will not be valid this year. Please introduce a win limit. Don't enable or don't allow individual players to win too much, because that would create just yeah, some sort of risk for the future development if it relies too much on one player. And we also like to see some yeah, variety of actors in this game. Yeah, the blue part will be tendered later this year, starting in August, and talk about the criteria for that one. Those are the pre-investigated sites that you have some more information about soil conditions, etc. The important aspect here is that it's split into quantitative award criteria and qualitative award criteria in yeah, 2/3 and 1/3 ratio. The qualitative criteria are about environmentally friendly foundations, about the methods that you're using to install them. Some other details spelled out as well. You don't want to see gravity foundations. Yeah, some other techniques would be favorable. yeah, you need to show that you have some PPAs or long-term electricity supplies to third parties in place, which does not really differentiate between players because probably everyone will have these ready. And there's also some share of trainees that you need to come up with and show that you're better than your competitors. Yeah, it's an effort to make sure that we have enough skilled workforce or enough skilled personnel in the coming years. And you also want to show that the parts that you're using, they are made by renewable sources for electricity. Yeah, so here's the here's the original plan of how these proceeds, if that would raise again billions of euros, that supposed to be used. 90% of that would be valid during the operation phase that you need to pay a bit later. Bringing down electricity costs means 90% of these proceeds will go into grid development. 5% are earmarked for marine environment projects and 5% for environmentally friendly fisheries. For the last year, the government decided to shake that up a bit and cut the fisheries part down to 1%. Marine environment projects to around 4% and introduce a new transformation component that will be some 6% of the proceeds, is still a couple $100 million. We generally think that's a good idea to have that kind of transformation component, but we think it shouldn't go back to the government budget and disappear there. In a sense, it should be used to support the build out of offshore wind. One good use could be financing of port development. But that's a bit more tricky because of federalism considerations. That money is raised at the central state level, and ports are being operated and expanded by the individual federal states. And it's a bit tricky to get money from this one level to the other. Part of what we are discussing with the government, how that could work. So one really important aspect of what European Union does is trying to make the European supply chain for offshore wind and wind industry in general more resilient, and trying to maximize the extent to which energy transition is made in Europe. And what we've seen in Germany, like in the energy space, that we've been overly dependent on natural gas from Russia. That's kind of a warning to us that we shouldn't be overly dependent on third-party countries. Mostly talk about China here for individual parts or components for wind energy in general, offshore wind in particular. So the Net Zero Industry Act is endeavored to deal with these questions. The new thing is that it introduces non-price criteria, not only the award criteria that I talked about for Germany, but also pre-qualification awarding, like a yes or no question, not some thing that you'd like to see yourself better than others. That will be mandatory for 30% of the annual volumes, starting in 2026, I believe. That's still being implemented. That's been signed here. Pictures from March, I think. The European Commission and the member states will come up with some detailed rules as late as March 2025. Right now, talking about these rules and how we'd like to see them together with our colleagues from Wind Europe and other players. So like details on how to assess resilience contribution, like I said, need to be done on a project level or some other level, and details will be worked out during the year, maybe until early 2025, and curious to see how that will work out. But really important, because we don't have these rules in place yet, and of course industry would like to see some kind of harmonization across member states in Europe, and not 27 or not dozens of rules individual member states, countries. The European Union Directive, Renewable Energy Directive 3, is about one really important aspect of that is how to deal with the environmental impact assessment. Right now, as we speak, there's a hearing in the German Parliament, the Bundestag, where my boss is talking about that topic along with others, where they want to learn or to hear different perspectives on how to implement this directive into German law. The main question is, from a European perspective, the environmental impact assessment has come under pressure, and will be more or less scrapped under these plans. You wouldn't have detailed assessment at project level anymore if these plans are become reality. You'd have a more detailed assessment. That's why I'm showing here the site development plan for the North Sea. You'd have a more detailed assessment at the level of when decisions been taken, which areas will be suitable for offshore wind, and you would have a 45-day screening that would replace the environmental impact assessment as a whole. Our members are telling us to not completely replace this, and so we are pushing for the environmental impact assessment as an option, like a voluntary thing. The problem is right now you wouldn't be able to get these assessments in the consenting procedure, and we think that this should be allowed again. We think that authorities should be required to consider this data that's being generated from such endeavors. What will most likely be scrapped is stakeholder participation, which is part of the process. And the general idea is to speed up the development of offshore wind here. Of course, stakeholder participation will take some time, but might be a different case in onshore wind or offshore wind. For offshore wind, if you scrap stakeholder participation, you don't really get your projects online earlier, because that's all about the pace of grid development. When you can able to connect, or that part doesn't change the date that you will be able to connect your project to the grid. So it's a bit unclear why this is so important to this speeding up effort is so important here for offshore wind. But would like to see at least the voluntary assessment possible. Would like to see authorities required to work with that data when they come up with a consenting decision. So again here, it's been talked about this morning. This is really important information that's in this plan. Site Development Plan, Flächenentwicklungsplan in German, or FEP. I think it's a very useful tool. We are expecting these days another update, probably this Friday or maybe 1 week later. Gives us information on where future sites will be located and in what order these will be developed. Like one main issue associated with the order of development is wake effects in the German Bight. The main direction of the wind is from west to east, so these new row of sites were not really popular for those who already have their plans in place for those further east, because if someone gets in the way where the wind blows, it reduces the amount of electricity that you'll be able to produce. So there could be a way to structure the build out, and we'll see how authorities deal with that, with these considerations here. We also hope that grid build-out will be stable. We've seen one grid connection system being delayed by a bit, so we might not see the 30 gigawatt target fully implemented by 2030. That's the bad news. The good news is that the at least 40 gigawatt target until 2035 will probably be significantly over-implemented, so we'll see some positive developments there due to the plans by grid developers to install or to have 4 gigawatts per year ready starting in 2030. So last but not least, industrial capacities will also need to match what needs to be done. We've lost some important companies and during the bad years. Now we're trying to get this capacity back, and we we know that financing conditions are really important and need some bit more support from the government. They've taken a small step, a good step, opened a development bank like our KfW developing bank, loan programs for the supply chain for offshore wind, which was not the case before sometime in April. But for the time being, that's only, I think only 25 million euros are available there. That should be significantly larger, the tickets here. And we also like to see, or we're happy to see talks going on about converter platforms being constructed in Germany, in Rostock, and maybe also Bremerhaven. Picture here is the last of these units being shipped out from Rostock, Warnemünde, already a few years ago. And that'll be really good for development of jobs and economic activities in Germany as a whole. But it is a challenge to get the right people to get these jobs done. To give you a perspective, in the Ostend Declaration, it was we learned that there's around 80,000 jobs related to offshore wind in the EU right now, and that's supposed to grow to 250,000 in a few years only. And it will be difficult to find these people, to get them educated, trained, and in place for everything that needs to be done by then. Yeah, so much for now. Thank you very much. Happy to take questions and have some bonus slides here in case you'd like to know something about other topics related to offshore wind.
Thank you, Sohn. That was a lot of information, but a lot of things going on, which is good. I think lots is happening. I don't know if there are any questions right now. Otherwise, I have a look if Susie has already arrived. Susie, if you're here, I can't see right now.
I have arrived.
Ah,
I'm here.
perfect. Great. Yeah, welcome. We're happy to have you. I've already introduced you, and yeah, I just hand over to you to give us some updates on Australia.
Thank you. Thanks, Marie. And it's great to see some nice familiar faces from our visit to Germany. It's great to see you, Hans. And
Good to see you.
lots of familiar names on the webinar as well. So yeah, I will attempt to share my screen.
Susie, sorry to interrupt, but I don't think your video is working.
Oh, okay. This is probably beyond my technical abilities. Let's see. Is that working?
Not at the moment. Maybe. Okay. So we can see on. There we go. Yes, perfect.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That was easier than I thought. Next step may be successful. All right. I've had to use my other computer because this one did not want to open on my work computer. Oh, okay. Can you see a presentation?
Yep.
Fabulous. Okay. So, yes, I'm going to give you a bit of an update on what's been happening in Australia.
Sorry to interrupt you again, Susie. We can see the PowerPoint window, but we can't see the presentation window, which you've opened. I saw you click on the presentation mode. So there should be a second window open, which is the slides at full screen, which is, I think, what you want.
Show presenter view. Is that working?
I believe. One thing you can do is open it in, before you share the screen, open it in presentation mode. And then when you share it, select the presentation mode screen instead.
Okay.
So if you unshare, have the PowerPoint open in presentation mode, and then select that window instead of the PowerPoint window.
Sorry, folks. We'll get there.
We'll get there.
All right. How's that?
There we go. Yes.
Okay. We're winning. All right. So yes, I'm going to share some info about what's been happening in Australia over the last few months. It's been extremely busy, as anyone who's been watching or is here would know. So a little bit about me for those that I don't know. I work in the Offshore Renewables branch in the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water. Our branch is responsible for developing and implementing the legislative framework for offshore wind in Australia. And we have a number of teams. My team's the strategy and partnerships team. So we look at a lot of the issues and policy areas that are needed to get this industry up and running in Australia that are sort of outside the actual legislation and an area declaration process, which I'll talk a little bit about. I'm not sure if you've probably already done an acknowledgement of country, but in Australia, it's our tradition to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia, recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture, and pay our respects to their elders past and present. So an update on declared areas and feasibility licenses. For those that are, I guess, less familiar with our legislative framework in Australia, the first step towards having an offshore wind industry is to identify, consult on a proposed area that could be suitable for offshore renewable energy, and then declare that area if the minister chooses to do so. So that process is a very detailed process. It involves consultation with our environment colleagues who also sit within our department, as well as other Commonwealth departments, including Defence, Maritime Safety Authority, who obviously have a large role in shipping, as well as fisheries and state governments, and then also consulting with the public. So we run a series of public drop-in sessions and targeted meetings with traditional owners and peak bodies in the area to get a real sense of the overall constraints and opportunities of a proposed area. So fast forward from, I guess, well over a year ago now, a year and a half ago, the Gippsland area was declared. Gippsland is by far the largest declared area. And since then, the Hunter area has also been declared. That's just north of Sydney. And the Southern Ocean area has also been declared. Both the Southern Ocean and Gippsland are off Victoria in our southeast corner. We have 3 other priority areas. So since we went to Germany, the Bunbury area has been proposed and been consulted on. That feedback is under review. We've also finalised consultation in the Illawarra. In the Illawarra, there was a really strong reaction in the Illawarra with a lot of submissions, over I think 14,000 submissions in relation to the offshore wind proposed area. So that's taking quite some time to get through, as you can imagine. And we also have a proposed area off the north of Tasmania, which actually joins in its northern boundary the one of the parts of the Gippsland zone that's already been declared. So they're both in Bass Strait. So as soon as an area is declared under our legislative framework, we're able to open for feasibility licence applications. A feasibility licence can be issued for up to 7 years. So we've obviously, we received, I think it was 37 applications for the Gippsland zone, which was probably, I think it's safe to say, significantly more than we expected. And we sort of jumped through every hurdle and hoop to get to what we're nearing the finish line there at the moment. There's a little bit more detail on the declared areas. So in Gippsland, there's actually been even some change since this map was produced. The minister granted 5 and now 6 licenses to proceed with their feasibility studies. The further 6, the pink have been granted. Green are undertaking further consultation as part of our legislative framework. The Native Title Act in Australia still applies, and that means that any future act, essentially, that could impact on the values of traditional owners, and that includes sea country values, must be consulted prior to the granting of a license. So those potential licenses are being consulted on at the moment, and we expect decisions on those in the next couple of months. So we have 12 potential license holders, 6 granted, 6 more potential. If you add up all of those potential projects, it's 25 gigawatts, which is pretty massive. And it's a lot more than the Victorian government targets. The Victorian government in Australia is the only state government with targets. Their targets are for 2 gigawatts by 2032, 4 gigawatts by 2035, and 9 gigawatts by 2040. So assuming at least one of or 2 of these projects go ahead in the time frame, then they will and truly meet their early targets and most likely all of their targets. So that's been a really exciting development. We know who our industry players in Gippsland are, and we can start sort of moving forward with kind of the next phase. What is the next phase? Well, the preparation of a management plan is really what's required next, and there's kind of 2 steps to this. There is the need to have a plan for the feasibility studies that will be undertaken, and then the more detailed, I guess, development of a management plan for the commercial project, and that involves consultation with a number of stakeholders. It'll involve having gone through our environmental approval system, which is under the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. It's a separate approval, but that will feed into the management plan required under the Offshore Electricity Infrastructure Act. And overall, the management plan needs to be approved by our offshore infrastructure regulator. So there's quite a few steps still to go, including our own regulations. So we are developing the second tranche, if you like, of regulations to support our Offshore Electricity Infrastructure Act. The first tranche allowed us to proceed with the licensing. The second is around how to move forward from there, including management plans, design notification schemes, financial security, and a few other issues around work health safety and such. We've recently consulted on the regulations. That has also closed. And now we're assessing, I guess, the feedback, and I think that might also be this slide. We're assessing the feedback on those now. Obviously, a lot to work through. There's a lot of detail to try and get these right, but we're also in a hurry because the feasibility license holders can only do so much and before these regulations are in place. We're also consulting at the moment on the transmission and infrastructure license guidelines. I think the consultation on those guidelines closes at the end of this week or perhaps next week. Again, we'll be looking at that and trying to move as quickly as possible, but also making sure that the regulations are fit for purpose. So just a point, I have noted that the Native Title Act and the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act still apply. There are several other acts that also apply related to occupational health and safety, underwater cultural heritage, and the Navigation Act. So in terms of other work that we are doing to try and set Australia up for success, we've got a what would appear to be quite a complex system, having a Commonwealth government, state governments involved in the offtake or controlling the offtake and auction processes associated with offshore wind. And we also have, as I mentioned, these other pieces of legislation, especially around our environmental approvals applying. So we know we need to provide a really clear picture and pathway for how projects can get up and running in Australia. And we know that we need to be very coordinated to do that. So our state governments, energy and climate ministers meet with our Commonwealth Minister in what's called the Energy and Climate Change Ministerial Council. They meet several times a year. Underneath that council agreed last year to set up a national offshore renewables working group. We've done that. We have members from all the states and the Northern Territory in that working group, as well as a local government representative. That really supports the development of offshore renewables, allows us to have those conversations that around issues that need national coordination, including development of workforce, supply chain coordination, local content policies, policy and regulatory alignment. There are some laws of states, including for work health safety, that don't necessarily get turned off when in the offshore waters. So working with them to make sure there's alignment both from a work health safety as well as environmental approval perspective. And then also around social and cultural license. I mentioned in the Illawarra, we had a lot of submissions. We also, associated with that, had a lot of misinformation out in the community, and that's still there, unfortunately. So one of the things we're working on is trying to get some consistent messaging, but also a plan to develop some activities, both led by government, but also industry and other sectors within the community that can really get factual information about offshore wind available, readily available to the community, just to make it a level playing field. We also have bilateral working groups with our state governments that are adjacent to proposed or declared areas. And obviously, you know, Victoria is the most advanced in their thinking around offshore wind, and that's really been a useful group to pursue some of these discussions around how to align as best as possible. So next steps.
Susie, sorry to interrupt you, just to say that we're a bit short on time, so.
Okay, yep, this is my last slide.
Just a heads up, perfect, thank you.
Oh yes, we are too, sorry. So I mentioned social license, social acceptance. It's a big challenge for us. We've got a lot of work to do there. We need robust environmental decision making. We have quite a different process to in Germany. We don't de-risk projects through environmental surveys prior to these licenses. So what the government is doing is investing in science to develop those baseline data sets to inform decision making. Ports are a big challenge. We know that, I think, from the last panel. It's a huge challenge for us to get ports ready in time, but that again requires a lot of coordination. And then also working together to overcome the supply chain constraints, being so far from the centre of these supply chains, as well as you know, the desire to create local opportunities. It all needs to work together. And I mentioned misinformation, and I'm pretty sure that's it. Oh, we haven't talked about that. We do have, you know, areas that are specific to floating, and that's another consideration for us in the future. Both our Hunter and Illawarra areas will require floating offshore wind. So how do we work, particularly with other countries, to progress that technology so it's ready? And I think that's it. I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Susie. That was a brilliant overview. Lots happening, and I think the point on floating versus fixed bottom will be picked up in our next and last panel. As I said, we're a little bit short on time, so I'll quickly hand over to Tom, who will moderate the next panel.
Great, thank you, Marie. If what we're going to do is just to give justice to the remaining speakers, maybe extend by 10-15 minutes. I haven't heard from Bernard yet, if he's able to do that. Matthew can, which is great, but Oliver has to go at the end of the hour, so we'll address his questions first and then move through the rest of it. So that's just a bit of a preface. As you can see them popping up on the screen right now, we have three really interesting panelists to join us now that have experience in offshore wind. And I'm just also pinning their screens as I'm speaking. I'm doing a bit of the tech stuff in the background. So we have Bernard Casey, who is a Gippsland Skies board member from Mainstream Renewable Power. We have Matthew Dickie, who is Head of Regulatory Affairs APAC at RWE Renewables. And we also have Oliver Coleman, who's Technical Manager at Skyborn Renewables Australia. And I can't see him right now. So
Thomas, I think my video needs to be turned on by you.
All right. How's that?
That looks like it's working.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So everyone's here. That's great. Yeah, thank you for joining. Thank you for staying so late. So I'm just going to dive straight into the questions. And I'm going to start off with Oliver. So Oliver, can you tell us a little bit about the projects that you have in development in Australia? Maybe take a quick step back and tell us about Skyborn Renewables just briefly, and then about the projects you have going on in Australia.
Sure. Okay, so Skyborn Renewables is a global offshore wind developer and independent power producer, and we operate solely in the offshore wind sector. We've got over 20 years experience developing, constructing and operating offshore wind projects. We're headquartered in Bremen and in Hamburg. To date, we've had 10 offshore wind farms fully approved, and we've managed or are managing construction for 6 of those projects, with 3 of those 6 now fully operational. Our current project development pipeline is over 30 gigawatts in 8 different markets. I should also mention that since September 2022, we've been a portfolio company of Global Infrastructure Partners, who is a leading global infrastructure firm based in New York. In Australia, we're a team of about 7. We've got a project interest in the Hunter declared area, the New South offshore wind farm, and also in the Bunbury proposed area in Western Australia, the Mayallup offshore wind farm.
Okay, great. Just following up on the previous panel that we had, wanted to ask you what role do you see ports playing in the development of your projects, in particular the Port of Newcastle and New South offshore wind farm?
Yeah, well, so I think the Port of Newcastle is going to be key to the delivery of the New South offshore wind farm, and indeed any other offshore wind farm in the Hunter declared area, potentially also offshore wind farms in the Illawarra area, if and when that zone gets declared. Due to the water depths in the New South Wales declared area in Hunter and proposed area in Illawarra, floating foundations for wind turbines are going to be required. So it's really important that we have the development of a wind turbine integration berth somewhere. Port of Newcastle is of critical importance really for the Hunter zone due to its proximity to the Hunter declared area. Now, a wind turbine integration berth is essentially where you bolt the turbine onto the floating substructure before it gets towed out and moored at the site. So it's important to have one close by, not only to reduce those tow out distances for the assembled offshore wind turbines during construction, but also you need to provide a space for a major component replacement, because while there are some maintenance activities that are going to be able to be handled at sea, if you're going to change a blade or a nacelle or a main bearing, we think it's pretty likely that you'll have to tow the machine back into port. So a consideration here for the Port of Newcastle is you might be having a concurrent project delivery while you also have project O&M. So there needs to be wind turbine integration berth, which essentially has a very large crane that's capable of lifting very heavy components like nacelles, which are over 600 tons, at the berth to do those major component replacements. I think it's also a consideration that the port will need to have sufficient wet storage. If you look at a port as a full scope service and installation harbour, then you will need somewhere to basically float off the floating foundations after they've been assembled. Now, a floating foundation is likely to take months to be assembled, whereas bolting the turbine onto the top of that foundation might, take days to weeks. So you really want to make sure that you're not constraining your project delivery by having a serial production process that you don't have enough storage space for the floating foundations, essentially.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for those insights. I just got reminded that we were meant to have Susie join us as well. So I'm going to add her here. Thanks, Susie. Sorry about that. Oliver, I'll come back to you before you have to go, but I thought I might ask a couple of other questions here. So first, now I'm going to ask Bernard, if you could just briefly introduce yourself and Mainstream Renewable Power, and then one of the main reasons we asked you to be on the panel is because you're in the consortium with AGL and received a feasibility grant. We're given permission to conduct a feasibility, start conducting feasibility studies with the feasibility license. So maybe you could tell us like which companies are part of the consortium and what types of roles they will play.
Sure, Thomas. So Mainstream is an international renewable energy developer. We're headquarters in Ireland. Our current biggest markets are in Chile and South Africa, where we have about 1 gigawatt of projects under construction. In offshore wind, we're active in the UK, Sweden, Vietnam, and Korea, and very pleased now to be kicking off in Australia. In terms of the feasibility license that we secured recently, yes, we're very, very pleased to secure this on our consortium, which we call Gippsland Skies Offshore Wind. Is a joint venture between Mainstream, Reventus being the two international developers, AGL and Direct Infrastructure is our partnership.
Okay.
So I guess, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the second part was, and what roles will each member of the consortium play?
So I think in terms of the international side of the consortium, we're kind of bringing our offshore wind experience and bringing the, I guess, technical lead to the project. Our local partner, AGL, will allow us to draw on best industry practice in Australia, and while at the same time ensuring that we have direct knowledge of the regional needs, and to help to ensure that we develop a project that serves the interests of Gippsland.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, thanks for that, Bernard. Yeah, come back to you as well. And so next, Matthew, I'd like to ask you some questions, and if you could briefly introduce yourself and I think everyone probably knows what RWE does, but even then you could briefly say what RWE Renewables is doing, and then the question I'd like to ask you is about the Kent offshore wind project, which is also proposed for Gippsland, but is currently, as far as I could tell, at the First Nations consultation stage. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what's happening at that point.
Sure. I look after regulatory affairs for the APAC region for our renewables business, and RWE, maybe for Australians, it's not as well known, but it is a 125-year-old German energy company, been involved in a range of technologies and still are, but really our future growth is focused on renewables, and that's both onshore and offshore. As far as offshore in Europe, we have 19 operating offshore wind farms, and the 20th one's currently under construction at Sophia. In Australia, we've got a team of about 70 people. They have been working mostly on onshore to this date. That's both onshore wind and solar and battery storage. And now we're really excited to be hopefully developing some offshore projects as well. So yeah, we got recently notified that our Kent offshore project has been recommended for license award, but as you spoke to, we're subject to First Nations consultation under the Native Title Act. So we're awaiting the outcome of that process. Hopefully it's a positive one for us, and then we look forward to moving into the development of the project. As far as the next steps for that project, I think Susie alluded to it earlier. We can't go out and start developing the site, doing on-site studies or anything like that until we've got a management plan in place. So we need to do a lot of consultation first up, make sure we're addressing different concerns, both of government, of community, First Nations, and I guess understand those concerns, do our risk management, do our planning, put all that together into a risk management plan, and seek approval from the regulator for that before we can then go out, install the floating LiDAR, do our geophysical, geotechnical surveys, and alongside that we'll start looking at our environmental impact studies, getting ready for permitting and consenting topics as they come up down the track. Do a lot of work with industry groups and regulatory bodies. I think there's still quite a lot of detail that needs to be fleshed out for how these projects will be developed. So trying to influence that regulatory design, make sure it's workable, and I think the financial support side of it still is quite raw, quite early stage. So hopefully influencing that design as well. And just that continuing engagement, I guess, with community, First Nations, is going to be super important. Talking about it in the sense of the management plan, it sounds quite transactional, but we want to build, own and operate this project, and so we're going to be around for 30 odd years, so we want to have really strong relationships with the communities and people that will be affected by the wind farm, and that'll be hopefully in some cases working on it or interacting with us in some way. So that's the first stage of work.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate that. So I'm just going to come back to you, Oliver, because you have to go, and apologies if we jump around on topics a little bit, but I wanted to ask you, being a German heritage company, as like RWE, can you share your perspectives on the Australian offshore wind market, with keeping in mind, the German heritage aspect?
Yeah, I think that the market's pretty attractive because there's obviously a stable system of government, if not necessarily consistent policy between the parties. But we see several clear policy signals that provide the framework for the industry. Obviously, the RWE Act, which Susie's discussed already. What's going on in Victoria with the government's wind implementation statement, the auction for CFDs, a 9 gigawatt target by 2040, and the establishment of dedicated offshore wind grid connection points through VicGrid. So that's all really positive. And then back to the federal level, we see the Commonwealth's net zero emissions goal by 2050, and then various state decarbonisation targets as well. And then grid transformation initiatives such as the Rewiring the Nation Fund and Capacity Investment Scheme. I think broadly we see a nation that has load centres along the coastline, often next to existing port infrastructure, and with a need to triple renewable energy production by 2050 under the Australian Energy Market Operator's optimal development pathway in the most recent integrated system plan draft. So we see the needs there, and we see the start of the policy signals that are required to underpin the industry. I think there's some challenges there though as well. the licensing schemes obviously different to what we see in Germany. So there's potentially a little bit more risk because you don't have any pre-examined sites. It's not clear that you're going to have dedicated grid connection points as well. But there's obviously a lot of opportunity because none of the offshore wind sites have yet been built out. So all of the best sites are still here for developers, and there's the opportunity to import the European experience and really take those learnings. And I think forums like this are so valuable for that.
All right. Sounds like maybe a meeting just started for you.
It did.
Okay.
I might have to bow out there.
Okay.
So look, thanks all, and very interesting discussion. Sorry to have to leave right on 7.
No problem. Yeah, thanks for joining, and sorry we didn't have enough time to get to all the questions for you.
No worries. Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
See you, Oliver. All right. Well, Susie, I'm gonna kind of pitch this question to you, but it's really for comment from both of the others as well. So you mentioned, I think it was the second last slide, there were sort of 5 dot points, and one of them was about the supply chain, and as one of the major challenges for the offshore wind market in Australia. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about what the supply chain challenges are potentially looking to be at the moment.
Yeah, sure. Look, I think they're plenty. We are a long way from Europe and the main centres of supply chain. Installation vessels are probably the first one that come to mind. So if you are actually available anywhere in the world that can install the size of turbines that are being looked at in Australia. So how do we attract them to the Southern Hemisphere, and how do we keep them here? So I think, for that and all aspects of the supply chain, really, it's about not only looking within Australia at what at working together to provide that sort of pipeline of projects that's going to attract some supply chain, but also working with our neighbours in the region, other countries who are pursuing offshore wind, and trying to coordinate with those countries to make our region really attractive. So we're sharing a lot of lessons that we've learned with countries who are not quite where we are, but also learning, a lot from others as well. So, I think you could probably put a supply chain constraint against pretty much all aspects, with the targets internationally. I don't think there's any area that you'd tick off as saying, no, we won't have a problem there. But I think it's about maintaining that investor certainty and the pipeline of projects and creating that visibility to get things down to Australia. But I'd be very interested to hear what the other panel members think.
I would agree, Susie. I think in the supply chain discussions we're having at the moment, they've mainly got a sort of wait and see approach about how they invest in Australia. They don't yet see certainty in the market that would justify, big investments and capacity here. I think everyone's hopeful that will come, but the issue of the license is one thing, but then there needs to be a route to market for these projects, and that's still a little bit unclear. And so I think a lot of these the big component manufacturers, they're waiting to see where that lands, and then they'll look at investment, hopefully. I think lawyers and consultants have already benefited. That part of the supply chain has gone okay. But as far as the actual, the builders of the major components, it's a bit of a wait and see approach at the moment.
Bernard, I wanted to add on to that question, say, in your experience of seeing international developments, do you see comparable situations anywhere where, you can take experience from in dealing with a situation like this? And also, have you been to Australia? Do the distances make sense to you? Because some people come from Europe and they just go, oh, okay, it's a lot bigger than I thought it was.
Yeah, I guess in terms of parallels, I'd see quite a lot of parallels in the early stages of offshore wind in the UK. our first involvement in the UK was around 2010, when the UK government had identified zones around the coast and set up a competition process. This was for UK round 3, very similar to the process run by in the Gippsland area. And I guess the government there were struggling with the whole topic of how do we build the UK supply chain for offshore wind, and that's been a kind of, over the last, I would say, 10 years, has been a partial success story, but not a great success story, in that quite a lot of the supply chain for the big success of UK offshore wind has come from outside the UK. But one strategy that was in place there was that as part of the planning process, you had to prepare a supply chain plan, and this was also part of the requirement to participate in an auction. But there was no kind of binding obligations on that supply chain plan. So if you said you estimated that 30% of your supply chain would come from within the UK, you had to go into quite some detail around how that was to be achieved, but there was nothing binding there. And then on the other side, you have the likes of Taiwan, where they actually set quite an onerous supply chain requirement in the build out of projects, which has caused quite a bit of difficulty for developers in Taiwan in terms of, paying very, very high prices for project components that could be secured much cheaper elsewhere. So I think there's some lessons for Australia there, something between the two, between the UK and Taiwan. Encouragement for local content, but maybe stopping short of mandating it, certainly for the early first projects.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Bernard. So I think we'll just do one more round of questions, and then probably wrap up there, because yeah, we're a little bit of time. But Matthew, I want to go to you and ask about, where do you see the main areas for collaboration between Germany and Australia in this sector? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. So I think, I guess we haven't touched on the skills that we're going to need in the workforce in Australia yet, and that's a big factor. I think as much as possible, you want to get local people involved in these projects, but the fact is, all the offshore development has happened in Europe, and so to date, so we are looking forward to bringing some of that expertise over to help with different stages of these projects. I think we can also bring some of the learnings we've got from RWE. It's got a big workforce in the traditional power industries and coal, gas, and nuclear, and we have done quite a bit of work on retraining some of those staff to move into the renewables, the growth area of the business now for RWE. And Bernard, with your partner AGL, there's probably some parallels there, that that same sort of thing I think can happen in Australia with the the traditional thermal power plant workers transitioning into the renewables, and Gippsland's a great example of that, because the two industries are going to coexist for a while, I think. So great opportunities there. I think potential for a lot of the German supply chain also to come and invest in Australia, get involved in the build out, and just the learnings we can bring from the policy side. I think Germany's been a pretty successful market. I think Hans touched on some of the problems he sees in their rollout. It's not perfect, but the fact is they've got a lot of operating wind turbines in the ground, and I think we can learn a lot from them, both from what's worked and what could be improved.
Yeah, thanks for that, Matthew. Actually, Susie, I'm going to ask you the same question from your perspective.
Yeah, look, I agree. You know, from a policy and regulatory perspective, it's been, we already have a really good relationship, and the delegation visit allowed us to delve a lot deeper into some of those lessons, and come away with some really good insights into what to do and what not to do, what's worked and what hasn't. And, you know, I think just continuing to the discussion around offshore wind, the need for offshore wind. You know, I know green hydrogen is a huge priority, particularly in Germany for energy security, but also, you know, for Australia from a renewable superpower project and renewable superpower policy, but also to, you know, to be a renewable superpower and to produce all that green hydrogen, you need a lot of renewables. And so the role of offshore wind obviously is really important in that for Australia. So I think continuing the discussion with Germany around, you know, both the use of offshore wind, but also how to achieve it in the best way possible. So definitely lots to learn, I think probably from each other going forward in that regard.
All right, thanks for that response, Susie. And Bernard, I'm going to ask you the same question. What I'm going to ask you though is, what are you most excited about in terms of the project that you've got developing in Australia?
Well, I guess I didn't fully answer your last question. That's you know, working based in Ireland and on a project in Australia. Well, I should have said that I am moving down to Melbourne shortly. So so that'll make the time challenge a little bit easier. But yeah, I guess it's for me, it's very like it was back in the early days of UK offshore wind. Great excitement, great anticipation of a fantastic opportunity. We see that you know, there's a fantastic wind resource down in the Gippsland area, and you know, we've plenty of challenges ahead. Quite a lot of engagement to be done with all the sea users in the area. In our site, we have the Marinus link passes through our project site, so we have to work around that. And you know, so I think we're looking forward to building long-standing relationships with the community in the area, and you know, building a very sustainable industry for Victoria.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. And when you get down there, I don't know if you know much about Aussie rules football. It's quite similar to Gaelic football, but there's a team called St Kilda, and you really should go for them.
Yeah.
A lot of people are going to disagree.
Yes, I've heard of St Kilda, also called County Kilda.
Oh yeah.
Because of all the different Gaelic football jerseys that you see around there.
I think the St Kilda was a boat that docked down there at some point, and I assume it came from maybe Scotland or Ireland at some point. Yeah.
Possibly.
Okay. All right, so let's wrap up there. And thank you, Bernard. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Susie, for joining the panel, and thank you, Oliver, who's not here anymore. Let me just see. Oh, there's a couple of questions in the chat, which unfortunately I don't think we can get to. But if the panelists are able to just have a quick look at them and maybe answer them in text, that would be really helpful. Otherwise, I think the final remarks are up to me. Marie, do I need to hand back to you?
No, you don't have to. You can close the meeting, but I'll say thank you to everyone from my side. It was a pleasure.
Yes, and from my side, so really appreciate the number of people that came and joined this this exchange. There's still 30 plus people in here, which is great. And thank you to all of the speakers and panelists that we had from Germany, Australia, from Ireland. I'd also like to say thanks to Morgan and the Clean Energy Council for partnering with us on this event. Thank you to Francisca and Marie from Adelphi for their work and support in organizing this together with myself. And have a good evening or have a good day wherever you are. And I won't end the meeting immediately, so that if anyone wants to answer any questions in the chat, they can do that. So thank you very much.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Wie viel Deutschland leistet, das ist absolut beeindruckend. Also beeindruckend fand ich die Bilder von der Offshore-Delegation, die stattgefunden hat, wo man mal sieht, wie